She stood at my gate in a silk dress and gold-rimmed glasses, speaking like she was reading a resolution into the official record. You will sign the transfer papers next week. My son needs a recovery space. I looked at her, looked at the lake, looked back at her. No. She tilted her head like the word was in a foreign language. You don't understand who you're talking to. I do, I said. Then I turned toward my front door. You're standing on my land. Marian Chadwick had no idea those 5 words would be the beginning of the end for her. What started as an entitled demand for my family's lake cabin would unravel into something far bigger than either of us imagined. Because when someone believes HOA authority trumps decades of legal ownership, they're about to learn why property deeds exist in the first place. My father built that cabin in 1973 with his own hands. Every beam he cut, every floorboard he sanded down smooth, every window he framed to face Cedar Lake carried meaning he never had to explain. He chose that lot because of the morning light, how it came flat and gold across the water before the pines swallowed it whole. When he passed, I inherited it. 11 years, I maintained it exactly as he would have wanted. Replaced dock planks, repaired siding, kept the porch clear of debris. Inside, near the front door, he had hung a framed land survey from 1973, yellowed at the edges, county stamped, precisely measured. At the time, I thought it was just one of his retired engineer quirks. I didn't know it would become the most important thing in the house. Because while I was preserving his legacy one plank at a time, Marian Chadwick and her son Bryce were already studying my property like it was a line item on a spreadsheet. They didn't see a home. They didn't see a father's memory. They saw shoreline frontage, lake access, development potential. They saw something to be redistributed under HOA authority and community rules. Marian had brought her son Bryce with her, 30 years old, and carrying the expression of a man who had never once been told to wait. He barely looked at me. He was already studying the porch, the dock, the shoreline, mentally rearranging my property. Marian started speaking without pretending this was a conversation. She presented what she called a community reallocation proposal under HOA guidelines. She talked about Bryce needing a recovery-oriented living environment. She used phrases like equitable redistribution of underutilized community assets, as if that meant anything in plain English. I asked her which article in the HOA documents gave her that authority. She told me the board had already reviewed the framework. Which article, Marian? She said it wasn't productive to get into the weeds. So I went inside, brought back my deed and the official HOA governing documents I'd gotten from the county recorder's office, and laid them on the porch rail between us. I pointed to the property boundary, then toward the tree line where that boundary ran. She never looked down. She stared past the papers at the lake, as if legal ownership was just an obstacle to her preferred view. I told her the conversation was over and went back inside. Through the side window, I watched her on the phone before they even reached their car. I wrote down the time, 2:14 p.m. Then I started a second notebook dedicated entirely to Marian Chadwick. The next morning, I called the surveying company I'd trusted for years in construction engineering. I wanted fresh boundary verification. That night, while reviewing county parcel maps, I noticed something I had somehow never checked before. A 30-foot strip of land along the northern side of the HOA office complex. Everyone assumed it belonged to the association. It didn't. The parcel was registered to Douglas Scott, my father. I stared at the screen for a long time, then wrote down the parcel number and underlined it twice. A week later, after survey stakes marked my property lines, Marian retaliated. A notice appeared under my door before sunrise, printed on HOA letterhead. It cited Article 14b and claimed my survey markers were unauthorized construction, ordering removal within 72 hours or face daily fines. There was only one problem. Article 14b didn't exist. I checked the recorded HOA documents, the amendments on file with the county. Nothing. By 11:40 that morning, I had written confirmation from the county clerk saying exactly that. Then Eleanor Voss called. Eleanor was 71, lived near the HOA office, and looked exhausted in the particular way people do when they've been confused and intimidated so long they begin to doubt themselves. She slid a folder across her kitchen table. 14 months earlier, she had signed what she believed was a consent form to plant hedges. 3 months later, she received an invoice for maintenance on land she no longer owned. Buried in the paperwork was a transfer of 4,000 square feet of her backyard into a private maintenance trust. I spent 3 days pulling parcel histories for every lot in Cedar Lake Association. 47 properties total. By the end of the second day, the pattern was obvious. In 5 years, 11 properties had gone through voluntary easement transfers or covenant modifications. 7 transfers ended up with the same LLC, Lakeview Corridor Development Partners, registered agent Bryce Chadwick. This wasn't a mother trying to get a lake house for her son. This was land assembly fraud disguised as HOA governance. I called Dante Cruz, an investigative reporter I'd met at a zoning dispute. Then I hired Patricia OAE, a community association law specialist. That's when things turned personal. I came home to find my front door unlocked. Nothing missing, but Catherine's cedar box had been opened, its contents arranged in a semicircle on the floor. On my kitchen table sat a pre-signed property transfer agreement with my name, fields blank, waiting. Monday morning arrived cold and still. By 6:17 a.m., the first fence post went into the ground. The permit was valid. The parcel was mine. The work was fully compliant. At 8:04, Marian Silver sedan pulled into the HOA complex. By then, a third of the fence line was already standing, 6-foot black steel set in concrete, running exactly along the boundary of the strip my father had bought decades earlier. She got out, marched toward the crew, and demanded they stop. The lead worker handed her the permit. She looked at it, looked at the fence, looked at the parcel reference showing the registered owner. The sound she made wasn't quite a word. She called the police. 2 sheriff's deputies arrived, reviewed the permit, checked the parcel records, and confirmed exactly what she did not want confirmed. The land was privately owned, the construction was lawful, and there was no basis to halt the work. Neighbors started gathering. Eleanor came, Greg came, a few other homeowners who had quietly spoken to me over the past weeks. Then Dante arrived with a camera operator, and finally a representative from the district attorney's office in an unmarked sedan arranged by Patricia. At 9:45, I walked over carrying 3 manila envelopes. 1 for the senior deputy, 1 for Dante, 1 for the DA representative. Inside were 114 pages, tabbed, organized, irreversible. The fence made reality visible. Marian could argue with a man, bully a neighbor, manipulate a meeting. She could not argue with a recorded survey, a county permit, a lawful fence, and a prosecutor holding the file. After that, things moved quickly. Patricia filed the formal fraud complaint. The sheriff opened a criminal investigation into the break-in and intimidation. Bryce's LLC was hit with a civil investigative demand, and its accounts were frozen pending audit. The Regional Development Fund suspended disbursements. A city council member connected to the operation withdrew from re-election. For weeks after the fence went up, Marian Chadwick was formally charged. HOA governance fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conspiracy to obtain property by deception, criminal facilitation of unlawful entry. Bryce wasn't charged immediately, but his LLC remained under investigation, and the 7 transferred parcels were referred to court for avoidance proceedings. The Cedar Lake Association held a court-ordered board re-election 6 weeks later. Turnout was the highest in its history. Eleanor Voss won a seat. She called me afterward and said only one thing: I got my backyard back. All 7 disputed transfers were eventually reversed. Dante's reporting ran as a 3-part series and spread beyond the county. Greg declined returning to HOA work, said he needed a break from governance. I didn't blame him. What started as one entitled woman's demand for my family cabin had exposed a systematic fraud operation that had quietly stolen pieces of 11 properties over 5 years. But methodical documentation, patient legal work, and refusing to be intimidated had not only protected my father's legacy, it had restored an entire community's faith that property rights still meant something when you were willing to prove where the boundaries actually stood. Late that November, I drove back to the cabin in peace for the first time since all of it had started. The fence stood exactly where it belonged. The survey stakes were untouched. The dock steps were solid underfoot. I made coffee and sat on the porch until the morning light came across the lake the way my father always said it would, flat, gold, unhurried. Inside, I straightened the shelf again. I aligned the photographs. I set Catherine's cedar box back in its place and left it there. The cabin was quiet the way it was meant to be quiet. Not empty, not lonely, just still. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. No name, no explanation, just a GPS coordinate and one sentence. They didn't work alone. The coordinates pointed to another parcel 3 miles outside Cedar Lake on another shoreline entirely. I stared at it for a long moment, then opened a fresh page in the same notebook I'd started the day Marian first walked onto my property. At the top of the page, I wrote the new name because by then I understood the thing Marian never did. A boundary is not just a line in the dirt. It's a record. It's a map. And if you know exactly where it is and you're willing to prove it, then eventually the people trying to cross it are the ones who get trapped.